Sit down. Do not move. Do not move. Do not move. Sit down.
She said it was self-defense. For 4 years, she fought a murder charge. Then, just before trial, she pleaded guilty. 6 years in prison, no jury, no verdict. So, what really happened? The answer begins inside the courtroom where Courtney Clenney changed her plea. She did not plead guilty to murder. For 4 years, her defense had centered on one claim: self-defense. A trial was finally within reach. She was expected to testify. Instead, she accepted a deal: 6 years in prison, followed by 5 years of probation. And buried inside that same agreement was another fight, one that could continue long after she's released. But to understand why that plea was so significant, you have to go back to the beginning. Christian Obumseli died in April 2022, stabbed once inside the Miami apartment he shared with Clenney. She said it was self-defense. Prosecutors saw it differently and charged her with second-degree murder. For 4 years, that charge remained, until August 10th, 2026. That was the day everything changed, and the day this case ended without a single juror ever hearing the evidence. And then came the moment that changed everything. Prosecutors didn't walk into court preparing for the murder trial everyone had been waiting for. They walked in with an amended complaint. The murder charge that had defined the case for 4 years was gone. In its place was one count of manslaughter with a deadly weapon, and Clenney pleaded guilty. Just like that, the murder trial was over before it ever began. But the real surprise was the sentence. Manslaughter with a deadly weapon is still a serious felony in Florida. On paper, it can carry up to 30 years in prison. But Clenney wasn't sentenced to 30 years. She wasn't sentenced to 20. She got 6 years in prison, then 5 years of probation. And that enormous gap between what the charge could have meant and what she actually received is one of the biggest reasons this plea deal shocked people who had followed the case for years. Then, the court laid out the facts. As part of the plea, a summary of the agreed facts was read into the record. Judge Andrea Wolfson described Clenney and Obumseli's relationship as extremely tempestuous and combative. According to that account, both had been involved in previous domestic violence incidents. And the problems didn't stop there. Their apartment complex had already begun eviction proceedings after complaints from security staff and other residents. Then came the detail at the center of the case. The medical examiner found a single stab wound to Obumseli's chest, about 8 centimeters deep, striking the right subclavian artery near his collarbone. But Clenney's defense had always maintained that she threw the knife out of fear. Did she throw it, or was it something else? A jury was supposed to answer that question. It never got the chance. But there's one question the court record still doesn't answer. Why did Clenney give up the self-defense argument she'd fought for 4 years? We know what she agreed to. We don't know why. Clenney hasn't publicly explained the decision, and the court record doesn't give us an answer either. Maybe it was the evidence. Maybe it was the risk of a much longer sentence. Maybe 4 years of fighting the case had simply taken its toll. But those are only possibilities. None of them have been confirmed, and that's what makes this case so unusual. The plea gave us an ending, but not an explanation. Then, there's the part of this case that has nothing to do with prison time. Several states, Florida included, have laws meant to stop convicted criminals from profiting off their crimes. They're often called Son of Sam laws, a name borrowed from the 1970s serial killer case that inspired them. In court, Assistant State Attorney Sean Abahoff said something notable. The plea agreement itself contains no clause stopping Clenney from making money off books, films, or any other media tied to this case. He said his office intends to work with Florida's Attorney General and pursue financial proceedings if that ever happens. Clenney's attorney, Frank Prieto, didn't let that go unanswered. He argued that these laws are unconstitutional and said plainly that he intends to fight for his client's right to tell her own story. So this case didn't just end with a prison sentence. It opened a second, unresolved argument, one that has nothing to do with guilt or innocence and everything to do with what happens after. But while that question remains unresolved, one thing is certain. For Christian Obumseli's family, this hearing marked the end of a 4-year wait for some kind of resolution. A statement from his mother was read into the record. She described learning of her son's death through a phone call the day after it happened. A call asking for her permission to donate his eyes. She said no plea and no sentence could bring her son back. Her hope, she said, was that Christian would eventually be remembered as more than a name attached to a criminal case. The family's attorney, Larry Handfield, spoke as well, and he was far more direct. He told the court that in the moments right after the stabbing, Clenney stayed on the phone with her own mother. Then she called building security. Only after that did she call 911, a sequence he said should have been reversed. He said no attempt was made in that gap to try to save Christian's life. That accusation was never tested by a jury either. There was supposed to be a trial in this case. There was supposed to be testimony, evidence, tested in front of 12 strangers. A jury was supposed to hear both sides, the prosecution's case, the defense's claim of self-defense, and everything that happened inside that apartment. And then, after 4 years of waiting, they were supposed to answer one question. Was it murder or was it self-defense? But that moment never came. There was no jury verdict, no cross-examination, no final answer. Instead, Courtney Clenney pleaded guilty to manslaughter. She will serve 6 years in prison, followed by 5 years of probation. The murder charge is gone. But the question that defined this case for 4 years was never decided by a jury. The murder charge is gone. Courtney Clenney will serve 6 years in prison, followed by 5 years of probation. Christian Obumseli's family finally has a legal resolution, but not the trial they waited years to see. No jury heard the evidence. No verdict was reached on the self-defense claim.
I've been
Instead,
crying so much.
the case ended with a plea
Can I just
agreement.
say this already?
And now, one question remains from the night Christian died. What would a jury have decided? We will never know. Every story is based on verified facts, court records, and credible sources. Thank you for your time. If you enjoyed our work, please leave a comment and subscribe for more true crime stories.